So the budget came out, Obama's budget, and particularly I call attention to the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, which helped shape the STEM budget and the STEM education budget. There's some call for optimism here. The 2012 budget invested $3.4 billion in STEM education in the presidential budget. This was down from the prior year, which is problematic, but tremendously strong support for NSF, the increase in things like the Graduate Research Fellowship. This is a specific call and ask for appropriations on specific things. There were innovative seed programs. The wider program, initially dubbed the Wyman program, a lot of this is many thanks to our colleague Carl, who's AD of OSTP, really taking the lead on education and a pile of other things. But this is to look at this dissemination of education research in the disciplines and what are practices that are based on those. It's only a $20 million program, but that's really, it would be a nice start. You could imagine it being the seed for other things. ARPA Ed, for those people who know the Advanced Research Projects Agency, DART, and what led to, I mean, this was huge in the military and the development of DOD. They've been spinning them off. There's been ARPA Energy, which some people have argued is a failure. They're proposing $100 million in ARPA Ed education. It eliminates some programs. GK-12 will not happen, maybe ever again. And certainly anything that is not proposed in the presidential budget will not make it further, because it's not, well, they're going to be small niche programs, but they are busy hacking and slashing, which brings me to a word about realism. House Resolution 1 was passed by the House, not the Senate, fortunately, proposing $150 billion in cuts. This is unfortunately being used as a blueprint. It includes things, and I sent out a piece here of huge cuts of, to the Department of Energy. If you think about where education funding comes from, a lot of it comes from NSF in what we do, but also Department of Energy funds places like JILA, one of our, well, JILA is actually largely NIST and Commerce, but Department of Energy supports many different programs here. Large-scale research efforts, broader impacts, are supported by funding to these labs, including career awards that have significant pieces. The operation and educational partnerships that national labs run are significantly cut. NSF was given a 5% cut overall, but 16% in STEM education over 7 months. 28% effective cuts. Now, the good news is that wasn't enacted. The bad news is that it gets worse. We're currently operating on continuing resolutions. Maybe you've heard about this. We're on our second continuing resolution that ends a week from tomorrow. Those continuing resolutions to be passed included $2 billion a week per cut in funding coming out. Not in all areas, but the level of discretion. These are coming out of discretionary areas of funding. And STEM and STEM education are lead among those for being cut. Interesting question about what happens. If there is not a budget that is passed by next Friday, there will be a government shutdown, and that will shut down national labs. I have a colleague at EPA who's being told to start mothballing his lab now. That's what his prospect is. They will keep essential personnel, but the number of essential personnel apparently is radically diminished from the last time there was a government shutdown. Right?
Oh dear.
Right.
Are you offering odds for a similar?
So the federal budget scene right now is a huge mess. My focus on this is to try and keep the American Physical Society's Public Policy Committee, the Committee on Education, the American Association of Physics Teachers Policy Committee, while attending to the immediate crises that are going on, and they are nothing but crises, to keep the eye on the long haul. To keep us, to say our priority, our goal is still a doubling of the NSF budget in 5 years. The current strategy shifts, so we're not going to ask for an increase this year. But to say that this is still our goal, if we don't continue to look out in the long haul, we are sowing the seeds of disaster. We're certainly not contributing. Some things that we haven't discussed but I think are important. Lots of federal level issues are going on. National standards we haven't talked about. That's another decadal study, not decadal study, NRC study coming out of Bose. Currently under wraps, we'll see how it comes out. The National Governors Association had led the initial effort for creating a national curriculum. NSTA, there's a STEM caucus, which is a political organization, lots of other stuff on the federal level.
The National Council of Teacher Quality is also active in trying to shut down schools of education currently by rating them on the basis of our syllabi. And so, and leading that is the same guy leading the PER group from the NRC.
Wow.
Yeah, it is really, it's a real crisis for education because we're in a position where either you comply or you don't comply, and what is the difference? It's not clear because they'll get our syllabi off the web and they'll rate the quality of our education on the basis of our syllabi, not on the outputs. Don't you think that's weird? Anyway, that's what the National Council of Teacher Quality is up to, and that's a very dangerous thing that's happening in the landscape as well.
It's a good thing. I will put that on.
Yeah, it's if you want to talk more to Lori or Jenny about that, that would really be useful because it's a crisis.
And you know what's interesting about this? And this matters. I mean, there's a huge, all kinds of issues going on. There's an effort to change the teaching funding and load at the University of Texas system at the university level. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting politics going on there. None of that seems to matter. Well, maybe this is the way that it does matter. None of the stuff that I talked about seems to matter actually enough as much as what happens at the state level. Especially in K-12, but overall. Education is a state issue-ish. So anyway, this is something that I didn't know early on. And it turns out it's easier for me personally to work at the federal level than it is to the state level. It's not that I haven't been trying for the last 5 years to work in the state of Colorado. Currently at the federal level, I've been working for about 7 or 8 years, and I mean, I got to write legislation, not that it passed, but remarkable. We may have that opportunity now in the state, but the state discussions are awful. The current state budget, higher education has been proportionally saved. $330 million is proposed in the governor's budget for K-12. How that's going to be realized is a real question. We'll see. That is a political maneuver. It's not that the governor hates K-12. What I've been hearing, I don't know if this is true, is that this is, the hope was that this is used to, as a mechanism so people will end up funding education by increasing taxes. There are proposed bills on the floor to increase taxes for K-12 for this. There are other things that are going on, local activities. There is the Colorado STEM Network, which was a governor's appointed regional networks for STEM education. There were 5 governor-appointed centers. Boulder was not among them. I think that's politics rather than policy at work. You can imagine that Boulder would be unique. So we created the Boulder Area STEM Education Coalition as one of these that currently sits as a sort of ad hoc voluntary group that's doing that. But that's going on as one mechanism for doing regional support.
What's the significance of legislation proposing tax increases in light of Tabor?
Oh, we're well below Tabor limits right now. So, I mean, right now Tabor, eventually Tabor would be a problem if we had revenues that were anywhere near what our cap is, but we're nowhere near where the cap is. So ultimately that Tabor would be a problem, but that's a false, things have gotten so bad now that we don't have to have another referendum seat, whatever it is. So, first thing is we've got to bolster revenues. So, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
I know that so those cuts that look terrible. I know that the Department of Energy, a lot of stuff that I looked at on the list, some of those they are still ramping up to prepare to do. So I think they're hoping for something better than what we saw there, not worse. Or it's not only hoping, but planning on.
Yes. So the thought is there was something between 120 and 150 billion dollars in cuts that was going to have to be borne in this. The thought is that they're going to be satisfied with something like 60 billion in cuts. We'll see. However, you can do the math. $2 billion per week on continuing resolutions. It's closer to the 100 scale figure. So we'll see.
But there is a political issue here, which is, you know, I mean, I may be disconnected, but we can't always be seeing lobbying for money for us when people are, I mean, the real issues in the country are things like Medicare, where young people are being squeezed out of health insurance because we're spending all of our money giving everybody 43 titanium hips. And you know, every old person in the country wants a titanium hip. And we need something, I think, a little bit more economically realistic. We can't always just say, give the NSF or the NIH twice as much money, good things will happen, because it doesn't.
I mean, especially if our country implodes because we've got no health care. But if you were to pick two items that are fundamental forms of investment in our society, there would be education and health care. So you've picked the one, Mike. I mean, the question is, do you want your heart or do you want your liver? You can't have one without the other.
So this comes back to this discussion of what PR is, right? NIH wants, I mean, the push at NIH is that everything is translational, which means everything is directly related to human disease as much as possible, because it is called the National Institutes of Health. It's not called the National Institutes of Playing Around with Biological Systems. And you know, that question becomes, well, if you're thinking about federal funding for some project, you know, there's an increasing demand for results.
Right, I disagree with you on that, Mike. I think you're right, but we can't only have applied. I mean, if you want to improve the health of people tomorrow, yes, applied research. If you want to help improve the health of people 30 years from now, pay people to play around.
I'm not talking about the reality of the situation. I'm talking about I'm talking about what's happening now.
Yes.
What's politically resonating.
Yes, exactly. Oh, what's politically resonating? I mean, here's a scary thing. It's not public yet, but there is a survey out by the American Physical Society, a poll on what it is that people are willing to fund. Basic research is the first thing that people want to cut in science. Yeah. So, among other things.
But you can, I mean, in a way, can you blame them? I mean, if physics research
I don't blame individuals because they're uneducated,
right?
If
physics research is perceived as something that costs billions of dollars and studies things that are completely unrelated to people's lives.
Right. Like, I mean, who would ever want the internet or the transistor, right?
Okay, that's...
Who would ever use a laser?
Right.
So,
I get that.
Well, the problem is most Americans don't. And that's exactly right. So I don't want to, this is exactly the question, do we have to join, that we had with AYP, do we have to join the discourse in order to have a seat at the table and do the right thing for today, or can we change the discourse?
And then you have to question, you have to start asking some really hard questions, right?
Absolutely.
Is it worth building a large hadron collider, or should the money be going into other things that are more likely to be...
And who gets to ask those questions and answer
People who
them?
pay for it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Unless you want to build it yourself.
Well, I think people who are knowledgeable about the potential impacts of those programs in the long term are...
You can be as condescending as you want. You're asking them to pay billions of dollars, and they deserve a coherent explanation.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a difference between investing in the science and investing in the scientists. Okay, so like people who are working in high energy physics are like great candidates, you know, for jobs in the nuclear weapons industry and so forth.
So how do you get that message across, right?
Right.
How do you get people to see that the only reason we can train physicists is we have to give them we need these guys, and we have to give them the toys that will lure them into being the guys we need.
Right.
We got to have more political discussions.
Thank you all very much. I apologize. I have to go.
That was really helpful.
Yeah,